Hi everyone, welcome again to our second live edition of Health, History, and Horses, the original podcast, and now a live version seated around talking about all things health, Saratoga history, and horses. If you know the little bit of history, actually that phrase was coined in the 1950s when the Chamber of Commerce hung up a sign outside town inviting motorists to come to the place of all health, history, and horses. Little fun fact. Once again, I am Dr. Christine Alexander Decker. I'm an endocrinologist with Saratoga Hospital, and more importantly, a born and bred native of this fabulous, famous Saratoga Springs. Here with me today, again, is Charlie Kuenzel, and our newest addition to the roundtable is Mr. Brian Boyer. Introductions?
Sure, if you'd like. Charlie Kuenzel, I taught 36 years at the junior high school and high school here in Saratoga Springs. Native Saratogian, and I serve presently as president of the Saratoga Springs History Museum, and I write a lot of different articles and things. I love Saratoga history. I love Saratoga, yeah.
And I'm Brian Boyer. I'm the Hall of Fame and Communications Director at the National Museum of Racing and Hall of Fame. I've worked at the museum since 2010. Before that, I was the sports editor at the Saratogian newspaper. I still do a lot of writing these days. I am currently the sports editor of Saratoga Living magazine, and I'm the author of 2 books related to horse racing in Saratoga, Bare Knuckles and Saratoga Racing, The Remarkable Life of John Morrissey, and co-author with Michael Veach of The Travers, 150 Years of Saratoga's Greatest Race.
We got a lot of high-tech people here knowing a lot about their subject matter. And I'm actually going to go off my beaten path of endocrinology. And I thought today, since it's the end of the year, it's December, we're winding down our calendar year, that I would talk about something more related to reflections and resolutions in health. We're coming to the end of another year of a pandemic, and I believe everyone is thinking now, how am I going to go forward in 2022? So I'm going to go off the beaten path from endocrinology, and I'm going to talk about something called lifestyle medicine. First of all, I am not an expert in lifestyle medicine, but I've done enough reading about it and enough instruction from other people that I think it's worth explaining to folks. Lifestyle medicine is an evidence-based philosophy of treating and preventing and managing chronic disease. And when I say chronic disease, I think you can come up with some examples. In my world, it's type 2 diabetes, but heart disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, arthritis are chronic conditions that we're managing in usually allopathic ways. And so lifestyle medicine is a different path to potentially use individually or supplement our allopathic ways of treating chronic disease. So lifestyle medicine has 6 tenets, and they include diet, exercise, avoiding risky behaviors and risky substances, promoting good quality sleep, managing stress, and encouraging and fostering healthy personal relationships. Little soft, obviously. There's no pills involved here, but it's a philosophy that I think we should supplement with our allopathic ways of treating chronic disease. Now, I would say there's probably a small fraction of patients that could do this exclusively to manage their disease. But our society promotes this as a complement to what we do in medicine. So the first tenet is diet, and it's spelled die with a T. And I say that somewhat flippantly, but I constantly give information and education to my patients all the time, pretty much every encounter about diet and exercise. The diet recommendation from lifestyle medicine is very staunch and pretty profound. They recommend a whole food, plant-based diet. Now, the United States, unfortunately, I don't think encourages that way of eating and fueling our bodies. But I think in some people, they could do it completely, but in others, they could really use to change how they use their diet. So I do not follow a plant-based diet. I actually think eggs and cheese should be in every meal that I have. So unfortunately, I can't even say that I tell everybody that they have to do it because I don't do it myself. So, do as they say, not as I do. But I do promote a healthy portion size diet, healthy food choices, nothing processed, lower carbohydrate versus higher processed foods, etc. So I think the plant-based diet may be more on the fringe of what is really achievable, but it certainly, is certainly a way. It's a good try. So, but again, I don't do that either. So the second tenet is exercise. Of course, and I give exercise advice all the time. I do as I say, not as I do. I lead an active, healthy lifestyle. And there are recommendations for amounts of exercise, not types of exercise, not choices of exercise, but sitting is the new smoking. It's a line that is in the press. Sitting is the new smoking. So we recommend, 5 times a week, giving me 30 minutes. So I saw a poster once in a gym in a high school that said there are 1,440 minutes in a day. Oh boy, I hope that
I think you're right.
1,440 minutes a day. We're asking for only 30. Not bad. So 30 minutes a day, 5 days out of the week. I think we can squeeze that in there, and you do it in any buckets, in any amounts of minutes that you can. It doesn't need to be 30 minutes straight. It can be 10-minute increments. It's just getting that heart rate up, moving the blood a little more, breaking a sweat. So, and there are a lot of people who are sedentary, so a lot of our jobs are sedentary.
Sure.
So we try to move. And then I go back to diet, and I talk about fuel into your bodies. Our bodies are an engine, so we want to fuel it with the best substances we can. I think sometimes we take better care of our cars than we do our bodies. We do the 3,000-mile, 5,000-mile check all the time. Now it's a check on our own system. So, third tenet is good sleep. Critically important. When you're tired, you're not on your game. So getting good sleep, promoting good sleep. And I think sleep and stress go hand in hand. Sleep, stress, and relationships are that Venn diagram. But if you're not getting good sleep, your body is physiologically stressed, not just mentally stressed. And when your body is stressed, you tend to not get good sleep. So they go hand in hand. I hear about people's sleep environments. They should, cool, dark room. Sounds pretty logical. I got to say it. Not many people, listen to that. Cool, dark room, no electronic devices, TV off, radio off, cell phone out of the bedroom. I mean, we tell that to our teenagers. We should take that advice ourselves. And then stress and promoting healthy relationships, they intertwine as well. And those are the last 2 tenets of lifestyle medicine. I know this is all kind of soft, but think about it. If we were all a little bit better about our self-care, I think our physical health would be better. So managing stress, critically important. How you do that is so individual. And again, I'm not a coach. I just ask you that if you feel stressed, both mentally and physically, that you find a way to reach out to somebody to help you with that. I think mental stress, again, is very harmful physically on our bodies, not just mentally. It takes us away from our focus. So finding things that relieve your stress. And then, having good relationships with your family and your friends, that makes you feel good. It increases our endorphins and all those feel-good hormones that's endocrine, by the way, feel-good hormones that float in our bodies. There has been some information, and I know I'm talking really fast because I didn't want to forget all this, but this period of time in our lives during this pandemic, this amount of social stress is the same as during a wartime.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, think about the things that we talk about, that we listen to in the press. Think about the things that are discussed around our tables. The possibility of being taken out of our usual activities for, being sick and worrying about our family members as much. Just as, we worried about people in wartime, we worry about people, in sickness time. So, but 6 tenets of lifestyle medicine, I think of them as a circle, and so the circle never stops. So one thing leads to another. Promoting good, one piece of lifestyle medicine promotes another. So this is the end of the calendar year. Reflect on what I've said and maybe think about resolving to incorporate it into 2022, excuse me. Charlie, you're going to tell us about holidays, since it's the holiday season, maybe,
yes,
in history?
Yeah, but after what you just told me, I think I should grab 2 handfuls of grass and run around the parking lot or something.
But make it eggs and cheese. Again, I don't promote just grass. Yes, not plant-based, eggs and cheese.
Okay, I was trying, but yeah, no, my topic is all about Christmas in Old Saratoga. In the last couple of years, it's been kind of interesting. I've had a couple people that have approached me and said, you know, you write a lot of stuff on just the general history, social, etc. of Saratoga. Saratoga was the #1 tourist destination in the United States. It was the place to see and be seen, and most of the writing that's out there is on society. And of course, most of those writings also ended when the hotels closed, the track closed, and people went away. So when they posed the question to me of what was it like in Old Saratoga at Christmas time, I started to think about where would I find some of this, and it really set me back because there's not a lot of writing on it. You got to remember, Saratoga back then was a smaller community. We may have blossomed or bloomed in the height of the summer to maybe 40 to 50,000 people. But for the most part, depending on where you are in the 1800s, 6,000 to 9,000 people lived here all year round. Most of them were blue collar. There were a few people that had made some good money in Saratoga as merchants or whatever. But for the most part, it wasn't a super wealthy community. And all the good writers, you know, once the track closed, the writers left, you know.
And once the crowds left and everybody went back to their homesteads,
Yeah.
the writers went with them. There was
Yeah.
nothing to talk about any longer.
That's right. And it gets hard to pull things out. But I started and I really went after this. And it's kind of interesting because what it evolved into was that Saratoga becomes a reflection of the way, and I'm going to pick just Christmas this time as an example of the evolution of Christmas. In the 1800s, there was no Frosty, there was no Rudolph, there was no Grinch, none of that was around. You got to go back to basics and say, well, there was the religious component that was practiced at every church and different group in town, but that was one spot. As far as the secular celebration went, there was a big amount of evolution that took place. And we can start and go way back. I mean, let's start with 2 components with that. When I think of Christmas, I think of trees and I think of Santa. So let's take those 2. Christmas tree. Everybody always says, oh, the Christmas tree's been around for a long time. It hasn't. It wasn't until Queen Victoria married Prince Albert of Germany that she was kind of forced into the tradition, which was mostly German at the time, of having a Christmas tree. So in 1841, they put up a Christmas tree with the royal family. But that Christmas tree was kind of not looked at, not thought about, not written about for sure, until 1848 when some of the London newspapers picked it up as a kind of a feature story at that time of year that the royals were going to decorate this thing, this tree. And they did such a good job with the descriptions and the narratives that they put out that they were read, of course, by Americans. And by 1849, oh my goodness, all the Americans wanted to be like the British and they wanted their own tree.
Isn't that ironic? Because 80 years before, they didn't want to be like the British.
It's a common theme that we used to come across in our business, which was that we fought a war to stay away from them, but then we wanted to be just like them all the time.
Bring the tradition on.
Yeah. So by 1848, 49, there's a few people, mostly wealthy, in the United States that are going to embrace Christmas trees, but not the common man. It's not until we get to about 15 years later, middle of the American Civil War, that all of a sudden some of the more middle-class people are starting to say, yeah, maybe we could do this. And they embraced it by putting up their own trees. But think about what it was like then. No electricity, so we had no electric lights, so it was candles. The amount of decoration that was available was limited. Ornaments had not become a real big thing yet in the world, not even just the United States. So as we look back, yeah, they started Christmas trees, but then what was going to be the big turn? The big turn is Edison. In 1880, Thomas Alva Edison is going to use light bulbs at Christmas time on a building in Menlo Park, New Jersey, where his offices were, and not on a tree. He decorated the outside of the building. And nobody else could do that. Because back then, number one, the bulbs were expensive, and number two, there was no grid out there, so you had to generate your own electricity. So as a result, It's kind of tough because the average person couldn't do that. So they sat back and watched. In 1882, a gentleman named Johnson, who was the president of Edison Corporation at the time, he was the first to put electric lights on a tree, and when he did, he only used 80, and he had his own generator in the basement. So again, it was only for the wealthy, it was starting slow, and it would continue to go slow for quite a while. And then eventually, as we get into wiring houses and grids and everything else, the Christmas tree is going to be illuminated, and it's going to be a very big central point of Christmas. But Santa Claus comes in kind of tough too. Santa Claus really doesn't have a very big part until the latter part of the 1800s. And it comes from some very interesting places. I got to tell you, you'll kind of reflect back on this and you say, if I was put in a quiet, dark environment, not to sleep, but just to, but to reflect, and somebody said, tell me a picture of what you think Santa looks like, I would paint it mentally. And probably most of it is based on things that artists have done prior that I remember. So you've got to kind of walk it back that way. And we find that even the concept of Santa Claus comes from the Dutch. Sinterklaas was the patron Saint Nicholas of the Dutch, and Saint Nicholas Day was December 5th. So they would tell stories of how the patron saint would come and visit and put things in stockings, and there were small gift giving, etc. Of course, the Americanization of that becomes Santa Claus, not Sinterklaas. So they start talking about, okay, Santa Claus does these things. What's he look like? Nobody's talking about what he looks like for quite a long time, but they're talking about how he has a part in the celebration. And then it's not until 1821 and then 1823 when Clement Moore writes "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" that all of a sudden they're defining him as he's got a sleigh and he's got presents. And Clement Moore goes ahead and says, there's 8 reindeer and here's their names. Prior to that, we didn't have that. So Thomas Nash, the old political cartoonist, by 1863, he decides he's going to do the front cover of his magazine, and he depicts on that, he draws for the first time a Santa Claus in a sleigh visiting Union troops at a battle site. And he's seen there for the first time. People love that. So the next year they were clamoring, are you going to do that again? And he did. And for a number of years he kept adding. He added the red suit. He added a workshop. He added elves. He created it. And then I'll go one step further with the idea of when I was growing up in the 40s, 50s, I think Coca-Cola did a tremendous amount. Because you look at the artists that Coca-Cola would bring in for what Santa would look like as he was sitting back enjoying a bottle of Coke, but at the same time, it started to draw that whole thing together of, okay, the red suit, the beard, everything about it. And it really is kind of interesting, the evolution of it. So what were holidays like in Saratoga in the old days? Not as much as we think. More religious, not so much secular. The evolution is going to take place. The one thing that I think also is a big deal is 1843, Dickens writes A Christmas Carol, and it's one of the first times that somebody demonstrates donations or charity at this time of year. And think about what a big part that is in our life. Think of how many groups and how many collections and things, which are wonderful, that are happening today. And they support so many needy people, etc. That wasn't part of almost the first half of the 1800s. But there was a guy in Saratoga. I have to bring in a little Saratoga history here. John Clark, 1823, came to Saratoga, and with a friend, he started a company bottling Saratoga water. And when he did...
His house is still on Circular Street.
Correct, yeah. And John Clark, when he was bottling, he was making a large amount of money. He was very successful. So he did a lot of things that were donations to the city and the infrastructure and things. But one of the things that, if you look closely, you uncover, is that he had a warehouse that was filled with used furniture. He was probably one of the first people in Saratoga that embraced the idea of charity, especially with people that had fires. There was a lot of fires in Saratoga back then. Wood structures, open flames, etc. So we've got an evolution of even local people that are going to play a part in this. But there's so many external features that makes this holiday, this one holiday I happen to choose, kind of come together to what it is today. So what was it like in old Saratoga? Hopefully you have a better picture now. So
Charlie, one question for you.
Sure.
Did the hotel shut down
yeah.
completely?
Yeah, they there were a few boarding houses that remained open in the 1800s, but not many. Traditionally, it was anywhere from the first week in September to about October 1st was the close down. None of them, United States, the Grand Union, Congress, even Grand Central, none of them, which were the big four, had any heat.
Oh.
No heat. So as a result, it started getting a little cool, and people were gone anyhow, and got shut down for the season. So, yeah. So good question. So, Brian, what do we got?
Well, fun for that, just to add on a couple
yeah.
things that were kind of neat. You were talking about emulating the British with the tree and everything. When you go into the racing aspect of it, it was only a few years later that they didn't want to emulate the British.
Yeah.
That's why the track goes counterclockwise instead of clockwise. The British run their races the other way.
That's right.
And that was one of the things that American forefathers of racing didn't want any part of. They wanted to make American racing look a lot different from British, so they went counterclockwise, and that's why you have that
That's a
tradition
great
today.
fun fact.
And another thing you were talking about, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. The other local tie with that, as I'm sure you're aware, is that was first published in a newspaper in Troy.
Right.
Troy Sentinel was first published in, I think it was 1823, somewhere around there. And there's a marker on one of the buildings. I don't know what street it is, but it's by the riverfront down in Troy. There's a big plaque commemorating the first actual printing of 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. So that's got a local tie-in a bit as well.
Fantastic.
So some kind of neat stuff. But yeah, that was great stuff. So
That's good.
yeah. I was going to talk a little bit about today. I looked at some research about Christmas names and racing, and I didn't find anything that stood out that people would really know. So I was going to get into a little bit today about the history of the National Museum of Racing Hall of Fame. I just thought with everything that we've done there in the last couple of years and its role in the community, and I think now is really a perfect time for locals to enjoy the museum, because what Saratoga's like in July and August, and going into the museum every day, it's just people running around, and it's great, and it's vibrant, and everybody loves it. But if you're a local person right now, there are so many great museums in Saratoga, and obviously the Saratoga Springs History Museum being one of them. The Military Museum, and all around town, everything. But the National Museum of Racing has a great history, and I kind of want to talk a little bit about that today. Good. So the museum was actually incorporated in 1950, and basically what happened is every year, every summer, racing centered around Saratoga Springs. You have Kentucky racing back then, you have Florida, and they were starting to build a little bit out in California to kind of make it more of a national scene. But every year, everybody wanted to be in Saratoga, which is basically the same as it is today. And there was really no national commission or anything like that, but they had, kind of leaders of the sport who came here, and one of the big ones was Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, whose name you see all over town, and Mary Lou's legacy and everything. But he met with his cousin, who was John Hay Whitney, and a lot of other influential people in racing, Alfred Vanderbilt, Howell Jackson, some of the people who were running the New York Association at the time. And Cooperstown had the Baseball Hall of Fame, but 1950, that's still only about 14, 15 years old. So they're still kind of getting around to recognizing history, and all these people thought, wouldn't it be great if here in Saratoga, which is the site of the oldest operating track in the country, dating all the way back to, the first meet here was 1863. The track opened the following year in 1864. Let's celebrate the sport's history where everybody comes together every summer. So it was a very modest beginning is what happened. They met, they incorporated. The first couple of years they had the museum, which at the time was just a couple of oil paintings, some silks, a couple of pieces of memorabilia. It was actually in the Saratoga Springs History Museum.
That's right, yeah.
For the first couple of years. Yeah, and it was extremely popular, though. The first couple of years, they had over 8,000 people go in just to look at this memorabilia, and they realized that, while this is great here, this is not the purpose of this building. So they needed their own space. They were looking around town, and they finally found the spot directly across from the track on Union Avenue. So the museum was finished in 1955. The first visitors came the following year, 1956. And throughout this time, the first 2 years, everybody said, well, what about a Hall of Fame? If you're going to have a museum, you got to honor the greatest participants in the sport. And it wasn't part of their original idea. They thought it would be a diversified set of galleries for an art museum, talk about, the history of racing silks and kind of some of the upper crust stuff of the sport. But there was a lot of push because Cooperstown had become such a popular attraction that Saratoga should have that as well as part of this museum. So the Hall of Fame came along 5 years after the museum did. Their first class was in 1955, and the original criteria was they only had horses, jockeys, and trainers. And that finally changed about 8 years ago when they started allowing pillars of the turf into the sport. And these are the leaders, the Whitneys, the Vanderbilts, the Phippses, the Hancocks, those sort of people. And the people who founded the institution were kind of among that group. They didn't want to have this perception that they were honoring themselves and their friends and everything. And they said, let's keep the honor to those recognized on the track. But as the museum has evolved over several years and decades, the thought process became, well, you can't really tell the story of the sport without including, these families and what they've meant to the game as far as their investments and what they've done as far as breeding and owning and innovation and what they've meant to the different tracks and jurisdictions. So that category is finally added, and it feels like it's been a more complete museum, I would say.
So how many categories are in the Hall of
So
Fame
there's
now?
4 categories now. There's horses, there's jockeys, there's trainers, and there's pillars of the turf. We have, as of this 2021 election, we have a total of 462 members of the Hall of Fame, which is a pretty good sized number. It's bigger than a lot of the other sports, but you also have to remember that baseball didn't come around until the 1890s. Thoroughbred racing goes all the way back to colonial era, and we have some early jockeys and trainers that were from that era, way before the Civil War. So it's got an incredible history, and the horses. Some of the ones that were legends back then, like Lexington and Kentucky and Ruthless, their impact on the sport is still felt today. One of the great things about racing is you can track legacies, and the breeding of horses goes back all generations. And there are 3 founding stallions that you can trace every thoroughbred that is bred today all the way back to these horses. So it's got an incredible history, and the museum over the years has honored all the greats, Man of War and Secretariat, all the way to this year when we put the most recent Triple Crown winner, American Pharaoh, not the most recent, but the most eligible American Pharaoh was inducted this year. So it's a great history, and the museum has been evolving over the years, and our big project recently was last fall, during the pandemic of all times, we finished a project, a major renovation to the Hall of Fame, which turned it into a completely digital, interactive, immersive experience. So if you'd been to the museum before, you would walk into the room and you would see all these plaques around the room, and it was a nice room, it was a quiet space, but it was a little sleepy. John Hendrickson, our president, goes, we really need to jazz this up. And the other part of the problem was we were running out of space in the room. We would have, with all the plaques there, we would have had to have either expanded out or expanded up, and we looked at all these ideas, and we finally said, what if we turn this into a digital experience? And at the center of that experience, we said, we need to have something big to draw people in. So we commissioned a film, a new 360-degree experience narrated by Bob Costas, interviews with dozens of Hall of Fame members, video on some of the gorgeous farms in Kentucky and New York. We shot at Saratoga Racecourse, we shot at Churchill Downs, Keeneland, out at Santa Anita in California. What we came up with was just a lot goes on in 16 minutes, and it shows the journey of a horse being born all the way to their career getting ready for the races. It shows perspective of trainers like Bill Mott and Todd Pletcher getting the horses ready in the morning. It shows the jocks, what they have to endure in their career to make it to
in
the highest
16
level.
minutes.
I'm not kidding you.
Yeah.
It packs a lot in.
It's unbelievable.
It's a lot of quick interviews and narratives. And it sounds like, yeah, right, okay, that'll never happen. But if you come over and experience it, whether you're somebody who just knows a little bit about racing, or you just like a horse, or if you're hardcore, I know the jocks, I know the trainers, I know all these great horses. It happens quick, it moves quick, but it covers so much ground. I can't really think that there's anything like it out there. And
you're right.
You've seen it. It's
I've seen
an
it
incredible
many times.
experience, and being the fact that it's a 360-degree experience, you sit in a different spot of the room, you're going to see something different that you didn't see the last time.
Yeah.
We worked with a group called Donna Lawrence Productions, who's done films for places like the College Football Hall of Fame, the Kennedy Library. They've done a lot, the New York History Museum, places like that. And the perspective she had on this and working with us down to the last detail was a lot of fun and phenomenal, and we cover so much in it. But They used 8K cameras and unique 360-degree rigs. They were in the infield at Saratoga Racecourse with a 360-degree camera and did all this stuff that, I couldn't even imagine what went into it. But it's so much fun. And basically what it does is you come in and you sit down and you watch the film, and the experience blends into the Hall of Fame. So at the end of it, it kind of invites you to, the walls come alive at the end, and there's all these stations where you can go up and you're like, hey, I want to learn about Secretariat. So the plaque of Secretariat comes up, and you can play a race video, or you can go through a photo gallery, learn about all the achievements. So I would say we're probably, we're probably the most interactive sports Hall of Fame in the country now. And that's not a knock on Cooperstown or Canton. They're wonderful, but for us, we really needed to do something different. And I think this new experience really brings a lot to the museum and to Saratoga, and helps as a tourist destination as well. We had great attendance this summer, but I wanted to talk about the museum now just because I think locals who haven't had a chance to go, or kind of waiting for things to quiet down, this is a great time. We are open year round. We're closed Mondays and Tuesdays, but the museum is open 5 days a week, and a lot of great stuff. And if you're not into all the Hall of Fame stuff, the artwork here is phenomenal. We have one of the finest collections of equine artwork in the world. There's children's programs. There's something for everybody. So.
And this gentleman will not tell you how much work he did on this, because your fingerprints are all over it in terms of the amount of cross-reference. I've enjoyed racing all my life, and to be able to bring up the material and the information that I know you had a very big part in is very neat.
It was fun though. I mean, you talk about you want to go to a job in the morning that you enjoy. You're not dragging yourself out of bed, but I love racing. I love the history of it, and especially the tie-in with Saratoga. I mean, I spent years writing books about the Travers and John Morrissey, and that's not my job. That was because I wanted to do it, and I wouldn't have done these things, and I wouldn't have the job I do if I didn't enjoy it. So I didn't look at it that way. I actually, when I redid all those biographies and everything, I looked at it as I could learn a lot more about these subjects. And, I'd known a lot of the names, but, to be honest, I couldn't tell you much about some of those 19th century jockeys that, probably didn't, some of them didn't even come to Saratoga. Some of them raced at tracks you've never heard of. But, it was fun to kind of dive into their stories, and each one had something really unique about it. And, it was a lot of fun to go through. And that's what people will get when they come to the museum. And, before we added these photo galleries and everything, I mean, you saw what the old plaques looked like. You could go in and let's take a jockey, for example, like George Barbie. You could learn a little bit about him, but now, you can click on these galleries and see what they looked like, see what they looked like in their times, and, when they're on their horses. Some of the horses, now you can go in and see what the digital paintings of them look like, or, what they looked like as a foal or in retirement. There's just so much to it.
That's great.
So I can't recommend it enough. I know I'm biased and I work there and everything, but
but you might be biased, but think of it, I'm president of the Saratoga Springs History Museum, and I'm endorsing what you got, because
and I started this because I love history in Saratoga. So
but it's all about the fact that we all have something good to offer, and yours is phenomenal, and you've done a wonderful job with it. It's great. Everybody in town should go.
Yeah, and I'm going to plug Charlie's, as the president of the History Museum over there. What you guys have is phenomenal as well. I mean, as somebody who wrote about John Morrissey, Morrissey founded this building as it was a gambling clubhouse. Everybody knows it as the Canfield Casino or whatever, but the history of that place, the history of that place is phenomenal, and he'll tell you more about than I can. But they didn't even let Saratogians into the building back then. You had to be an outside player, because Morrissey didn't want to make it look like he was getting rich off the townspeople. So he only allowed the high rollers from out of town in, and anytime somebody in town needed money for a road or a school or a hospital, he used some of the profits from that to keep everybody happy. And but the History Museum has so much great stuff as well, and the events there. It's one of those. It's one of those beautiful buildings in Saratoga, and can't recommend it enough.
Well, I think maybe in conclusion, we've got so many good things. Look at all of them, but the Racing Museum's brand new, and it's. I'm endorsing it because I love it.
I have 2 racing questions, though. So when I win Trivial Pursuit, because I know this answer, what are the 3 horses that we start with that all racing horses are derived from?
Sure. You have the Byerly Turk, the Godolphin Arabian, and the Darley Arabian.
So 3 breeds.
No. So these horses,
3 individual
horses. These horses were they were Middle Eastern, but what happened was they came through England. A lot of the breeding came through England, and then they brought these horses over, and that's what started the American breeding. And it was not always accepted. It took them, more than 100 years to get recognized by them in the British stud book. So, if an American horse went over there and had American breeding, they wouldn't recognize it in their charts and in their histories and everything. But William Woodward, who's one of the pillars of the turf, he owned 2 Triple Crown winners in his lifetime. He was very influential in Europe and in breeding over there. And he finally got the British to recognize American breeding. So those 3 horses were the founding stallions.
Yeah.
All right. The second question.
Sure.
So in the Racing Hall of Fame, every year is it one individual horse, one individual jockey?
No, we have an annual Hall of Fame induction ceremony, and we have those categories get voted on each year. We also have steeplechase inductees. So the categories are the 4 of those that I mentioned before: horse, jockey, trainer, pillar. But they have different categories that look at them. So, modern horses and jockeys and trainers are evaluated by a contemporary review committee. Horses that raced 50, 60 years ago, colonial times, way back, there's a historic review committee. They're
Gotcha.
more historical experts instead of more modern writers. And then once every 4 years, we have a steeplechase committee which meets. And we had inductions for steeplechase in 2021. So Jack Fisher, who basically wins everything over at Saratoga when it comes to steeplechase racing, got in, so he was eligible this time. But so every summer we have an induction ceremony at the Fasig-Tipton Sales Pavilion. We work with a group called Keeneland Broadcast, which helps us put together very fun, professional, high-quality video introductions of each of the inductees. Tom Durkin has served as our master of ceremonies for the last several years, and that's a lot of fun. The Hall of Famers come back for it. We usually get about 20 or so returning Hall of Famers that come and get recognized at the ceremony, and we pack the place every year, so it's a lot of fun.
Well, great. So this was very interesting. We had a lot more horse information this time around. Yep. Thank you all for listening. Please come back for episode 3.